My name is Micah Reyes, and all I wanted that night was to order pizza. It wasn't a craving born of celebration or sorrow, just the familiar draw of melted cheese and warm dough calling after a long day. I'd been at the office later than usual, wrestling with spreadsheets and budget forecasts until my neck ached and my brain felt like porridge. By the time I walked through the front door, the house was already silent. Clarissa had run out to a late meeting with a client, leaving only the soft hum of the overhead light and the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser in the living room. My phone had died on the subway, the battery draining like sand through an hourglass, so I padded into the den, rubbed at my temple, and booted up Clarissa's laptop where it sat on the desk. Her laptop was a constant in our home, the one place she handled correspondence, planned schedules, and tracked every detail of her blossoming public relations career. She joked that her computer brain was better than mine, and maybe she was right. She never minded me borrowing it for a quick email or, tonight, to satisfy a late-night pizza craving. I closed the lid, paused for a moment, then logged in. Our anniversary date scrolled past the login prompt, a reminder that our relationship had once been fresh, full of promise. I typed in the numbers 061214 and pressed enter. The familiar chime sounded, and I exhaled, already picturing pepperoni and olives. The browser opened on her favorite news site. I clicked the little pizza icon I'd added weeks ago, expecting to see the menu from Luigi's down the street. Instead, I saw something I'd never noticed before, 2 folders pinned to her desktop, bright and innocent looking. They were labeled Ever After and New Life. My fingers froze over the trackpad. Ever After, the phrase made me feel a squeeze in my chest, like a punch that came from nowhere. In New Life, beneath it, as if someone was cataloging fairy tale endings and fresh starts. I blinked, wondering if I was still half dreaming. Curiosity edged out common sense. I moved the cursor and double-clicked Ever After. A slideshow opened. My stomach twisted when I saw her Clarissa in a wedding dress I'd never seen her wear, ivory and lace hugging her figure a way that made her look both radiant and remote. Beside her stood a stranger, a man with dark hair, his hand wrapped around hers, face turned toward hers as if he were whispering something intimate. I clicked forward and saw photos of a reception area lined with fairy lights, a floral arch, tables dressed in crisp linens. There were shots of an invitation, embossed with gold lettering, Miles Corbin and Clarissa Reyes. My breath hitched. Miles Corbin, that was the name of her new boss's son, the tech investor she'd mentioned months ago. I'd filed it away as an industry connection, someone I'd likely meet at some point. But never like this. Never with her in a gown, that bright, heart-swelling smile pressed against his. I went back to the folder view, my fingers trembling. I clicked New Life. This time it wasn't photos but documents. Budget spreadsheets for a wedding, a guest list crawling with names I recognized, her mother Evelyn, my college roommate who'd once been drunk at our anniversary party, even my old supervisor from my first job. There were checklists: book venue, hire florist, send save the dates. Under ceremony date, I saw a date scribbled in Clarissa's handwriting, July 24th. Our anniversary had always been June 12th. July 24th, the month after next. The proximity was suffocating. And along with the plans and flowers and schedules came a PDF that caught my eye, a draft of a website for their new beginning. It showcased slogans like "A Love Rewritten" and a header image of Clarissa and Miles walking along a sunlit path. My chest felt hollow, as though I'd fallen through the floor. I closed the folders, but my heart kept playing the images behind my eyelids. The wedding gown, the black tux Miles wore, the suite's table heavy with rose petals, the table settings marked with names that would soon replace me. Clarissa, planning a life that didn't include me. I sat back in the chair, the leather squeaking in protest, and let my hands fall to my knees. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. There was no forceful reaction waiting in my mind, no cathartic release. Instead, I sat there, letting the shock settle around me like dust. I thought of how I and Clarissa had built our life over 7 years, late-night study sessions in college, scraping together rent with roommates, celebrating my first promotion, her nominations for industry awards. Quiet Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. We'd shared hopes and dreams, and I'd imagined growing old beside her. Now those plans lay shredded behind 2 innocuous folder names. The silence felt oppressive. I glanced at the closed laptop, its screen dark now, and forced myself to shut it as gently as I could. The click of the lid echoed in the room, a punctuation mark on the evening's revelations. I pushed myself to my feet, legs unsteady, and walked toward the kitchen. My mind churned with questions. When had this begun? How long had she been hiding these plans? What had I missed? But the kitchen offered distraction, if only in the mundane. There lay 2 empty cheese wrappers from last week's takeout and a lone bottle of soda with 3 sips taken. I opened the refrigerator, lit by the soft bulb, and saw nothing but condiments and leftovers. No pizza. I leaned against the counter, head bowed. My phone lay dead on the charger. I could charge it, call a friend, seek comfort. But clarity required time. I owed it to myself to process this betrayal in the stillness of the night. The hum of the refrigerator compressor filled the space as I closed the door. I moved to the pantry, where I half expected to find a hidden stash of wedding favors. Instead, I found only my empty hopes. By the time I returned to the den, I'd made a decision. I would have that pizza. Not because I deserved comfort, not because I believed a greasy slice could mend a broken heart, but because hunger demanded it. So I circled back, lifted Clarissa's laptop again, reached for the charger, and plugged it in. As the screen flickered and the login prompt reappeared, I steadied my breathing. Maybe I could salvage the night with something as ordinary as pizza. But as I logged in, 061214, and watched her desktop materialize, I knew nothing would ever taste the same again. I didn't throw the laptop across the room, and I didn't scream. I closed it instead, the soft click of the lid echoing like a challenge in the silent house. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid it off the edge of the desk and onto the floor, careful not to crack the screen. But careful enough that I knew exactly what I wanted to say to Clarissa when she walked back through that door. First, though, I needed to order pizza. The hunger in my stomach was hollow and dull, but it was still hunger, and it gave me something to focus on other than the betrayal still reverberating through my chest. I plugged my phone into the charger by the entryway and watched its battery icon claw its way back toward life. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer for the road of emotions I was about to drive. I leaned against the counter, observing the remnants of our life together, the half-used carton of eggs, the Tupperware with last night's chili, our calendars stuck together with magnets listing birthdays and dentist appointments. All of it screamed, us, a cruel reminder of the home I once believed we were building side by side. Tonight, I would reframe it. Tonight, I would begin to dismantle the illusion that I was helpless or broken. When the pizza arrived 20 minutes later, I paid the delivery guy with a crisp bill and took the box into the living room. I set it on the coffee table, tore open the lid, and inhaled the scent of melting cheese and olive oil like it was a lifesaver thrown to me in a storm. I tore into a slice and let the warmth fill my mouth, savoring the numb comfort of greasy simplicity. My phone buzzed on the charger, 5 bars now, and I ignored it. I had no messages I cared to read. No calls to return. The world could burn for all I cared. Right now, there was pizza and silence. That silence didn't last long. The front door clicked open, and footsteps approached, small, familiar steps that once would have made my heart leap with happiness. Now they felt jagged, intrusive. Clarissa drifted into view, shoulders relaxed, hair pulled into a loose knot at her neck, her face soft with the glow of her expectation that tonight would be routine. She set her purse down on the hall table and slipped off her shoes without looking my way. I watched her, mouthful of pizza, and when I swallowed, I rose and crossed the room. I reached out and brushed her arm, then leaned in to kiss her cheek. It was the same gesture I had given her 1,000 times before, gentle, affectionate, unremarkable. She turned, surprised, and flinched slightly as if she sensed something was off but couldn't place it. I smelled her perfume, a rose and sandalwood blend she favored, and for a moment I almost regretted the plan I'd begun formulating in my mind. Almost. "How was your day?" I asked, voice casual, as I gestured toward the couch where the pizza box sat. She forced a small smile and tilted her head. "Just planning some boring client events," she said, smoothing down the front of her blazer with one hand. I had to confirm the speakers for the symposium, and then I met with Evelyn to finalize the guest list for her luncheon next weekend. Her eyes flicked to the pizza, and I wondered if she noticed the way her breath caught. "You hungry?" she added. "Starving," I replied, waving at the open box. She sat beside me, perching on the edge like a guest in her own home. I slid a slice onto a plate and handed it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and I felt the electric shock of memory, late-night slices in college, bouts of laughter over shared toppings, the ease of our early days. Those memories clawed at me, but I swallowed them down with another bite, letting the cheese stretch and break like a cord severing itself. We ate in companionable silence, broken only by the crunch of crust and the occasional clink of a beer bottle against the table. I watched her chew, studied the lines around her eyes that deepened whenever she laughed, and I made a note of every detail I would use later. Her expression was unreadable, neither guilty nor unconcerned, just indifferent. I realized then that she believed our dinner was normal, that nothing had changed. I swallowed a bite of bread and decided to feed her a new narrative. I was thinking, I said, setting down my plate and folding my hands on the table. Evelyn's birthday is coming up, right? This weekend. She nodded, wiping sauce from her mouth with the edge of her napkin. Saturday afternoon luncheon, she confirmed. She's been planning it for weeks. I want to get her something special, I said, leaning forward. Her favorite perfume, maybe? The one she always talked about. Her brow lifted in surprise, and she blinked as though she hadn't considered a gift. That's thoughtful. Her voice held a flicker of warmth that I hadn't expected. I smiled. It was the kind of smile that unsettled me, that smile in the mirror when I first realized I was done playing the victim. I'll pick it up tomorrow. Micah, she began, hesitating as if she wanted to say more. Then she closed her mouth and nodded. Thanks. I watched her push back from the table and stand, and when she crossed to the kitchen sink to rinse her plate, I let her move away. Behind her, I closed my eyes and pictured the moment I would hand that perfume to Evelyn, the look of gratitude on her face before the rest of the story came out. I would watch the cracks form in Clarissa's perfect facade as the truth spread like wildfire through her family. I would sip champagne at her wedding reception, my wedding reception, while she discovered that nothing about our marriage was as she'd planned. Clarissa finished cleaning and turned back to me, wiping her hands on a towel. I'm going to head up, she said softly. Big day tomorrow. Good night, I replied, standing and picking up my beer. My throat was tight, but I kept my voice steady. She paused at the doorway, looking at me as if something was different, but she couldn't name what. I met her gaze, offered the smallest of nods, and watched her climb the stairs. When the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Alone in the dim light, I replayed our dinner like a scene I was directing. Every smile, every gesture, every whispered word was part of a script, my script. I wasn't shattered or weakened by her betrayal. On the contrary, clarity had sharpened me. I leaned back on the couch, closed my eyes, and let the plan for my next move crystallize. The poker face was done. The real game had just begun. Luna showed up at my door late Friday afternoon, rain dribbling off her umbrella like a slow confession, and when I opened the door, she didn't even ask how I was. Instead, she held out her phone, a spreadsheet of guest names plastered across the screen. You want her crushed or publicly eviscerated? She asked, voice low, eyes glinting with that wicked accountant's humor I've always admired. I let the question hang, then folded my arms. Both, I said. She laughed, a short, delighted bark. Then stepped inside, closing the door and shaking droplets off her coat. We sat at the kitchen table, our weapons arrayed around us, open folders of wedding photos, guest lists, seating charts, even a PDF of the invitation spread across Luna's laptop like readable paper. Every detail had Clarissa's handwriting, curlicues on names, arrows pointing to flower choices, budget numbers, and neat columns. I remembered how I used to marvel at her meticulous planning. Now it felt like evidence in a crime scene. I leaned forward and tapped the PDF. Her fiancé? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Miles Corbin. Luna nodded, scrolling down. The tech investor. Son of her boss. Nepo wedge and privilege all wrapped in a tux. She smirked. He's clueless about how dirty she's been playing both sides. I stared at the screen, remembering that golf tournament she bragged about, where Miles claimed to be just an investor, never mentioning our marriage. I closed my eyes, picturing her bright lie. When I opened them again, I knew exactly how I would RSVP. We gathered intel. The seating chart put me, her husband of record, in a non-existent spot, a ghost seat at table 12. I made a mental note of the florists, the jeweler who crafted her ring, even the pastry chef for the cake. Nothing would escape me. If she thought this would be her perfect day, she was mistaken. I wanted her to feel every misstep, every stolen smile, speck by speck. Luna printed out the guest list and circled names. Evelyn, her mother, top priority. Philip Reyes, my father, tertiary but potent. Marcus and Simone, longtime family friends who I knew would waver once they smelled scandal. Even Clarissa's cousin Beth, the one who once sneered that I'd never really fit, made the list. I pulled the sheet toward me. We're going to send them each an RSVP, I said, voice low and determined. She cocked an eyebrow. And what will yours say? I smiled, a flash of steel. Yes, I will attend, I answered. I'll be glad to witness the vows of a wife who kept her groom in the dark. The words felt good on my tongue, a promise and a threat. Luna typed furiously. Formal guest card. RSVP, accepts with pleasure. Handwritten notes added beneath. Your friend and former husband, Micah Reyes. We proofread it until it felt just sharp enough, a polite blade. Then we loaded envelopes, lined them with printing containing a link to an online photo album labeled Our 7 Years Together, where the first image was a picture of us on our wedding day, smiling into the camera. Beneath it, a caption, June 12, 2018. When I said, I do, I meant to you. I sealed each envelope with crimson wax, stamping it with the seal I did custom-made. The initials M and C entwined, the date beneath. It looked official, like an invitation rather than a demand. If Evelyn wanted to see how thoroughly Clarissa had deceived me, all she needed was to lift the flap. When we'd finished, Luna packed up her umbrella. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Next step, she asked, tucking my printed RSVP cards under her arm. I rose and crossed to the window, staring out at the gray sky. I'll RSVP myself, I said, voice calm. Then I'll make sure Miles learns how messy Clarissa's past really is. Luna nodded, shouldering out through the door. Call me when you need more firepower. I watched her go, then turned back to the table strewn with evidence of her betrayal. I gathered the guest list and spreadsheet, stacked the photos into neat piles, and slid them into a manila folder. I wrote across the tab in bold black marker, Chapter 3, A Wedding Without a Groom. Beneath that, in smaller letters, Operation RSVP. I wanted to savor her reaction when she opened her mailbox and saw her own RSVP, addressed in my handwriting, the one she'd memorized, the one she'd never expected to see again. I wanted Miles Corbin to read my name and hesitate, to wonder why I hadn't moved on, then click the link and confront the albums of moments we shared. I wanted her parents to whisper behind champagne flutes, questioning her choices, her loyalty, the truth of everything she'd said over the past year. As evening settled, I grabbed my coat and keys and headed out into the drizzle. My first stop was the postbox at the corner. I walked briskly, each step fueling a cold satisfaction. At the box, I slid each envelope into the slot. The thump of paper hitting metal echoed in the empty street, like the closing of a verdict. When the last card disappeared, I stood back and let the wind wash over me. My mind ran through the reaction I'd planned. Shock, confusion, guilt, and perhaps, finally, accountability. I adjusted my collar, the rain beating on the fabric, and headed back home. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd begin drafting the next move in my silent war. Leaks to the local paper, subtle hints to Evelyn's friends, a quiet whisper campaign that would let the scandal blossom on its own. Walking back, I pictured Clarissa's expression when she fetched the mail, brows knitting, lips parting in a question, heart sinking as she read my RSVP. And Miles? He clicked the link too, revealing the life she'd led under my roof while planning a new life with him. I paused beneath a street lamp, letting the glow catch the raindrops around me like tiny stars. Betrayal was brutal, but justice, cold, measured, inevitable, was sweeter. I smiled into the darkness, knowing I held the power now. Clarissa, my wife, had organized her perfect day. What she never planned for was her groom's grandest entrance, the one that would leave her standing at the altar alone. I left my apartment early on Saturday morning, the city still waking up under a pale haze of dawn. My mission was simple: obtain Evelyn's favorite perfume. I knew Clarissa had mentioned it in passing during dinner conversations, something floral with a hint of amber, delicate but memorable. It was the perfect gift on the surface of things, an olive branch dipped in poison. I drove to the boutique she frequented, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in with the practiced air of a thoughtful son-in-law. The sales associate greeted me by name. Evelyn often shopped here, and led me straight to the display. The bottle was exquisite. I took it from the shelf, inhaled the scent, and smiled. The same warmth that had once filled our living room now coursed through me with a different purpose. Behind me, the associate wrapped the bottle in crisp tissue and slipped it into a black velvet box. I paid without flinching at the price. This was an investment in my plan. As she handed me the box, she leaned forward. He's thoughtful, that Micah Reyes, she whispered. I nodded, meaning both the compliment and the irony. I clasped the box with both hands and stepped back into the morning air, the perfumed sweetness mingling with the scent of rain still clinging to the sidewalks. I drove to Evelyn's house, rehearsing my lines and picturing her smile as she opened what she believed was a gesture of goodwill. Her house was immaculate, a reflection of her meticulous nature. I rang the doorbell and waited as the stained glass window beside the door shimmered with the rising sun. Evelyn opened it before I could knock again, her expression bright with surprise. "Micah, what a lovely surprise." She ushered me into the foyer, and her husband, Gerald, hovered nearby, offering polite nods. I extended the box. "Happy early birthday, Evelyn. I remembered you mentioned this fragrance." She gasped softly, her eyes lighting up. She lifted the velvet lid, cradled the perfume, and brought the bottle to her nose. The faint whiff of jasmine and amber danced between us, and she closed her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. I watched her for a moment, savoring the ripple of pleasure across her face. Then I offered a polite bow. "I'm glad you like it," I said. "Enjoy your day with Clarissa and the family. I know how much you've been planning." Evelyn's expression shifted, the warmth tinged with curiosity. "Thank you, son. You're always so considerate." Gerald gave me a firm handshake. I smiled and excused myself, but as I turned to leave, I added softly, "I thought you'd appreciate knowing some things sooner rather than later." Evelyn frowned slightly, but didn't ask what I meant. I stepped onto the porch, the sunlight spilling across the perfume box in her hands, and I closed the door. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, feeling the calm before the storm. Delivering the gift had been effortless, almost polite, but the real elegance lay in what came next. I retrieved my laptop from the passenger seat, opened a file I'd created earlier that morning titled Marriage License Overlap, and sent it to Gerald's work email with a brief subject line, "For your consideration." In the message body, I wrote, "Happy birthday, Gerald. Thought you might find this document interesting." I hit send and leaned back. The file was a PDF of Clarissa's new marriage license application, stamped with dates that overlapped our valid marriage by several months. I forwarded the same document to Evelyn, CCing a trusted journalist friend at the local paper, someone who owed me a favor. I crafted the message carefully, a polite note about family transparency and public interest, just vague enough to pique their curiosity. Then I deleted the drafts, closed my laptop, and let my mind drift back to the image of Evelyn cradling that perfume, nothing more than a crimson wax seal away from discovering the truth. The next move was to watch the fallout. I imagined Evelyn's phone buzzing with emails, her hopes for a happy celebration curdling into suspicion. I pictured Gerald's face as he opened the attachment at work, color draining from his cheeks. And in my mind's eye, I saw Clarissa's world shatter like a crystal vase dropped on stone, her carefully curated life laid bare in legal black and white. I didn't need fireworks or shouting. Quiet revenge carried its own thunder. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of whiskey, the ice clinking softly. I replayed the day's events, savoring the tension I'd orchestrated. There was no rush, patience was my ally. Tomorrow, I would begin planting whispers among Evelyn's friends and at the country club where she golfed. I would discreetly mention a curious document I'd come across, watch as the rumor mill ground into motion. By the time Clarissa realized her mother's doubts, the scandal would be fully formed, a rolling tide she could never stop. I drained my glass, set the bottle aside, and looked out the window at the city lights flickering to life. The night stretched out before me, ripe with possibility. I was no longer the betrayed husband. I was the author of a new chapter, one where betrayal met its reckoning. And as I closed my eyes, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the sweetest elegance of revenge was in its subtlety, in the shift from trust to doubt, from celebration to scandal, all triggered by a simple gift wrapped in velvet and sealed with my resolve. I spent the week leading up to Clarissa's wedding in a state of meticulous preparation, turning every anxious thought into decisive action. On Thursday evening, I met Kai at the venue for what he called our dress rehearsal. He was already there, camera bag slung over his shoulder, clipboard in hand, and a sly grin that betrayed his excitement for the spectacle to come. The hall was deserted except for us. Rows of white chairs stood in neat lines, a pale aisle carpet leading to a raised dais where the floral arch would bloom tomorrow. Soft light spilled through the tall windows, illuminating particles of dust that danced like miniature fairies in the air. It was surreal to be here before the crowd arrived, to know that tomorrow this would be the stage for Clarissa's grand unveiling, and my own carefully timed entrance. Kai snapped photographs as I walked the aisle, capturing the empty chairs from every angle, from the front row where Clarissa's family would sit, from the center where Miles would stand, and from the back where I would lurk like a shadow waiting to strike. He murmured technical notes. "We need more fill light here. Watch for that glare tomorrow," but I barely heard him. Instead, my mind was cataloging every detail, the pale blush of the aisle carpet, the The way the arch's eucalyptus leaves would frame the couple, the position of the organ, the distance from the pews to the ceremony chairs. I memorized the path I would take, the precise spot where I'd stand when the officiant invited objections, and the voices that would pause mid-sentence. After an hour, Kai called out, "Time for wardrobe check." We slipped into a side room where a rack held my suit, freshly pressed and waiting. The charcoal wool felt plush against my fingers. The jacket was tailored to fit my shoulders like a second skin, the trousers slim but comfortable. I slipped into white shirt and black tie, straightened the lapels, and adjusted the cuffs so that just a hint of crisp fabric peeked out from under the jacket sleeve. Kai watched with approval. "Perfect," he said, handing me a small envelope. "You'll need this." Inside was the letter I'd written that morning, a notarized affidavit from Miles's ex-girlfriend, attesting to the double life Clarissa had led and the precise timeline of her deception. I folded it and placed it in my inner pocket, alongside a stack of receipts proving our still valid marriage, hotel invoices, joint bank statements, a birth certificate that bore her maiden name and mine. Each document was a brick in the wall of truth I planned to erect between Clarissa and her new life. I imagined the flash of realization in Miles's eyes when he read the letter mid-ceremony, the hush that would fall over the guests as they took it in. Kai filmed me straightening my tie and smoothing the lapel of my jacket, whispering directions into his camera mic. "Look contemplative," he coached. "Then glance up toward where she'll enter." I did as he said, adopting a posture at once calm and foreboding, like a sentinel awaiting orders. He captured me from the side, the empty aisle stretching before me, and from behind, the arch looming like a portal to a world that wasn't mine. In that instant, I felt both powerful and vulnerable, knowing that tomorrow every hour would be on me, waiting to see if I'd crumble or conquer. We spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out exit routes, photo angles, and timing. Kai marked the spot where his second shooter would stand, just to my right, to catch my entrance from a slightly different perspective. He noted the microphones for the officiant and for the string quartet, who would supply the music that shifted from Pachelbel's canon to a nervous silence when I made my move. We tested the audio feed, ensuring that every whisper, every gasp, would be recorded. By the time we packed up our gear and stepped back into the warm light of late afternoon, I felt the weight of my plan settle into my bones. Back home, I laid out the final pieces on my desk, the letter, the receipts, the notarized documents, and the printed copy of Clarissa's guest list with annotations in the margins. Send to press. Notify Evelyn's friends. Send follow-up to Miles. I traced circles around key names and dates, underlining the moments that mattered most. My apartment was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock, each tick a reminder that time was slipping toward the moment of reckoning. I made 2 phone calls, one to a lawyer friend to confirm that all documents were legally sound, the other to a trusted reporter to verify that they would be poised to publish at dawn. When both calls ended with positive confirmations, I closed my laptop with satisfaction. That evening, I tried to sleep but found rest elusive. I lay awake, replaying the ceremony in my mind. The string quartet's first notes, the slow procession of bridesmaids, the hush as Clarissa appeared, radiant and unsuspecting, then the moment the officiant paused and invited objections. I saw myself standing, glove-clad hand rising, voice steady as I called out her name. And in that instant, the world would tilt on its axis. It was the dress rehearsal I needed most, a mental run-through that left me buzzing with adrenaline. Just before dawn, I gathered my suit in a garment bag, slipping the letter and documents into a secure pouch inside my jacket. I dressed slowly in the half-light of my bedroom, buttoning each cuff, checking each seam. With the final adjustment of my tie, I looked into the mirror and saw not the man I once was but someone transformed by purpose and conviction. I spoke my vows to myself, vows of truth, accountability, and unyielding resolve. By the time I stepped into the taxi that would carry me to the venue, the sky was lightening. I sat upright in the back seat, coat draped over my arm, envelope burning against my leg. The city skyline glowed with the first rays of sun, and I took a deep breath. Tomorrow, Clarissa would discover that I was as committed to our marriage as she was to her betrayal. And at the end of this rehearsal, I would take the stage of my own life, finally free of illusion and ready to claim my truth. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of the venue's grand foyer as I stepped out of the taxi. My heart beat steadily, not with fear but with the calm assurance of someone who knows exactly who he is and what he deserves. I checked my reflection in the polished brass door handle. The charcoal suit I'd worn for the dress rehearsal, freshly pressed in a single night, the white shirt crisp, the black tie knotted with precision. I fingered the envelope in my inner pocket. My letter to Miles's ex-girlfriend, the affidavits, the receipts, each document a carefully laid brick in the foundation of my truth. I entered the hall before a soul had claimed their seat, the chairs draped with white satin and tied with eucalypt garlands. Kai, in his photographer's vest, greeted me with a nod and a low thumbs up. His second shooter hovered in the shadows by the back wall, camera silent but ready. The organist at the front practiced a few bars of Canon in D, the notes echoing off the vaulted ceiling. An attendant offered me a program for the ceremony, but I shook my head. I didn't need to know the order. I've been living this day in my mind for weeks. A gentle murmur rose as the first guest arrived, Clarissa's mother, Evelyn, greeted by the venue manager and shown to the front row. I watched her with detached interest, marveling at how her posture shifted from expectant pride to a flicker of uncertainty when she caught my eye. I offered her a polite nod, and she managed a tight-lipped smile before looking away. Across the aisle, I saw Miles Corbin enter, scanning the rows for his seat and for his bride. He wore a well-tailored tuxedo and carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to privilege. Yet when his eyes met mine, I saw the slightest hitch, as if he suddenly wondered whether he'd invited the wrong guest. The officiant took his place, followed by a quartet of string players who tuned their instruments and readied the first notes. The murmurs died, and a hush fell. In that silence, I felt the electricity of anticipation. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing the lapel and running my thumb over the envelope's flap. Somewhere backstage, Clarissa was having her final moments of composure, expecting the world to unfold according to her plan. Soon, she would see how thoroughly I'd rewritten the script. Soft strains of music drifted through the aisles as the bridal party began their procession. Bridesmaids in blush gowns moved in pairs, their steps synchronized, bouquets of white roses held close to their chests. Groomsmen followed on the opposite side, nodding politely to guests who rose in their honor. I let my gaze wander to the center aisle, picturing her, the woman I loved, walking toward Miles, toward the life she'd laid out in secret folders, toward the vows she planned to exchange with someone else. Then the music paused, and the officiant raised his hand. If anyone knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, his voice echoed softly, carrying through the stillness. The room held its breath. At that precise moment, I rose from my chair, straightened my tie, and took a single step forward. The polished wood beneath my feet felt solid, as though the entire universe aligned to support me. Guests gasped, cameras clicked. I locked eyes with Clarissa, whose breath caught, lips parting in shock. "Micah," she whispered, voice trembling. I offered her a small, steady smile. "Nice dress," I said, my tone light, as though commenting on the weather. "Bit white for a second marriage, don't you think?" The ripples of confusion spread across her face. I folded my hands behind my back, standing tall, every inch the wronged husband who'd found his strength. I walked down the aisle with deliberate steps, each footfall punctuating the shift in power. Guests parted to let me pass, some reaching to steady their chairs, others raising phones to record. Miles looked as though he might speak, but I reached the front before he could find his voice. The quartet began to play again, a hesitant chord that wavered between ceremony and chaos. I paused before the officiant and collapsed the envelope onto the small table that held vows and rings. The binding crackled as I opened it, and Miles leaned in, a frown of bewilderment creasing his brow. I cleared my throat, projecting my voice so every guest could hear. "I don't object to your marriage," I said, setting the envelope flat. "I object to its legitimacy." I slid the notarized affidavit and the receipts across the table, then handed the larger folder to Miles. "Inside you'll find proof that your bride-to-be has been married continuously to me since June 12, 2018. No divorce filed, no annulment granted." A murmur spread. "What? No way. That can't be." Guests leaned forward. Clarissa's hand flew to her mouth as her color drained. Miles undid the folder's clasp and flipped through pages. Our joint lease agreement, bank statements, even the photograph from our honeymoon, still crisp and smiling. In that moment, the ceremony hall transformed from a place of joy into a courtroom. Evelyn stood, her perfume bottle in hand, forgotten at her seat. She fixed me with a look that flickered between betrayal and admiration. I inclined my head in her direction. "I did give you a gift," I said quietly, voice carrying. but I thought you'd appreciate knowing some things before you walk down that aisle." She pressed the perfume to her chest, tears shining in her eyes. Miles straightened, face ashen, and aimed a glare at Clarissa. "Explain this," he demanded, voice tight. Clarissa scrambled, words tumbling out. I can fix this. I thought I could handle both." Her voice broke, and she sank into a chair. I watched her for a moment, pity and resolve mingling in my chest. Then I turned back to Miles. "You deserve the truth, not half-truths," I said. "Consider this my final act of goodwill." I nodded to the officiant, who cleared his throat and stepped back. The quartet struck a decisive chord, and the guests shifted, the air crackling with tension. I took a step back toward the aisle, back into the seat that had been mine for 7 years. Cameras buzzed, whispers rose, and in every glance cast my way, I saw something I could never have mustered before: respect. The rest of the world would digest the scandal in its own time, but here, in this hall, I'd reclaimed my story. As I sat, I realized that standing before that archway, both literally and metaphorically, had been the greatest entrance I'd ever made. After the ceremony collapsed into chaos, I remained seated, watching the ripples spread through the crowd like cracks in glass. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and the string quartet's instruments lay silent, abandoned mid-note. Miles Corbin stood frozen, pale and shaken, the folder of evidence still clutched in one hand. Clarissa sat with her head bowed, shoulders heaving as she tried to stem the tide of tears. Evelyn watched me with a mix of gratitude and grief, the perfume bottle loosely held at her side. I knew I'd done more than object. I'd exposed an entire life built on deception. When the immediate shock settled, I rose again, this time stepping to the back of the aisle where I'd left my envelope unsealed on the small table. I retrieved it, sliding my gloved hand inside to ensure the documents remained in order. Each paper felt weighty with consequence: the notarized affidavit, the marriage license overlap, the receipts and statements that proved our unbroken union. I pressed the stack together and turned to face Evelyn, then Miles, then the assembled guests. "Evelyn," I said quietly, the room hushed deepening around me. "I promised you clarity." She nodded, swallowing against her grief. I extended the bundle toward her. "Take these. This is everything you need to know to set your family right." Her hands trembled as she reached out, and I let her take the documents. She glanced at the cover page, then at me, eyes brimming with tears. Beside her, Gerald's face contorted with shock as he realized the scope of his daughter's betrayal. He touched Evelyn's elbow gently, offering silent support. I acknowledged him with a slight nod, our shared disappointment severing any awkwardness that might have lingered between us. Miles cleared his throat, voice brittle. You're still her husband." He glanced at Clarissa, whose sobs had quieted into ragged gasps. "So this wedding, none of it means anything." I met his gaze evenly. "It means exactly what you make of it. But if you choose to stand by her, you do so knowing the truth." I turned to Clarissa then, stepping closer. Her eyes, swollen and red, looked up at me with a pleading I no longer recognized. "You had 7 years, You built a secret life that excluded me." She shook her head, words catching in her throat. "Micah," I held up a hand to still her. "No more excuses." My voice carried through the silent hall like a gavel. "You said you needed time. Well, time is up." With that, I stepped back and folded my arms, giving her space to process. Guests murmured behind me, questions, sympathies, judgments, but I paid them no mind. This was between us, between my life as I believed it was, and the truth I reclaimed in that moment. Evelyn called out, voice shaky but resolute. "Clarissa, please come with me." She stood, gathering the documents and the perfume bottle, then extended a hand toward her daughter. Clarissa looked at the papers, at her mother's face, then rose unsteadily and took her hand. They walked together down the aisle, the crowd parting to let them pass. I watched until they disappeared through the front doors, sunlight spilling over them as if to highlight their retreat. Miles remained behind, staring at the empty space where Clarissa had stood. He closed the folder with a definitive snap and tucked it under his arm. He looked at me then, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I nodded once, granting him permission to leave. He gave a curt nod of acknowledgement and turned, striding from the hall with measured steps. I didn't resent him. For all his investment and pedigree, he'd been just as blind as I. Once the last guest shuffled out, the venue manager approached cautiously, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reyes," he said, voice low, Would you like us to clear the chairs? I let out a slow breath. No, I replied. Leave them. The rows of chairs, once decorations for a celebration, now served as silent witnesses to the unraveling of lies. They'll remind her of what she tried to do. He blinked, then backed away respectfully, leaving me alone in the hushed hall. I walked down the aisle one final time, pausing at the altar before the floral arch where Clarissa should have stood. I ran my fingers along the cool brass of the small table and picked up a stray program, letting it flutter to the ground. The once festive music box by the guest book played a few lonely notes before stopping. A shaft of late-morning light cut through the stained glass, painting colored patterns on the floor. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, this moment of stillness after the storm. I realized that the real significance of the wedding, our wedding, had been mine all along, when I chose to stand and speak the truth. Everything else was just background noise. Turning on my heel, I made my way back toward the entrance, every step feeling like a release. I paused at the back row of chairs and ran my hand along the empty seat where I had sat earlier. A silent promise formed in my mind. I would not look back, would not be lured by regret. I would step forward into the life I deserved, unencumbered by deceit. I reached the door and opened it, stepping into the bright glare of midday. The world outside continued its pace. Cars passing, pedestrians talking, life unfolding as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath and stepped out, the doors closing softly behind me. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the envelope in my pocket, its contents now in safe hands, and I knew I'd done what was necessary. Tomorrow, I would file for divorce and begin to rebuild. But today, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. In exposing the truth, I'd reclaimed my dignity and my future. And as I moved down the sunlit path away from the venue, I felt the first true sense of freedom I'd experienced in years. Security didn't touch me. They couldn't. Not with 200 guests streaming their phones live and a dozen reporters clustered at the entrances, ready to file the next headline. Instead, I stood at the threshold of the reception hall, watching the damage unfold like a silent movie in Technicolor. The guests milled around, shock written across their faces. Some clutched champagne glasses, others tried to comfort Clarissa's mother, Evelyn, who trembled beside her husband as they surveyed the spectacle. The ornate chandeliers above cast fractured light on the white linens and floral centerpieces, now symbols of a celebration undone. Miles Corbin, looking more like a man betrayed than a groom, had dropped the folder of documents at his feet and stalked from the altar with his jaw clenched. I caught his eye for a moment, saw the betrayal and confusion mirrored in his gaze, and then he was gone, swallowed by the columned corridor leading to the back entrance. Clarissa's tears had subsided into red-rimmed resignation as she sat at the bride's table, her hands twisted together in her lap. She glanced at me briefly. There was no guilt in that look, only the dawning realization that her carefully constructed world had collapsed in an instant. Behind her, her family tried to inject calm into the chaos. Evelyn waved her hand dismissively at the anxious host, murmuring something about keeping things under control, while Gerald moved to usher Clarissa's younger sister, Ava, away from the throng of curious guests. But there was no salvaging the afternoon. Every whispered conversation and exchanged glance perpetuated the ripple effect of her deception, and the wedding that should have been a single glorious moment had become a public trial. A hush fell as the venue manager approached me, clipboard in hand and expression uneasy. "Mr. Reyes," he said, voice low and respectful, "the ceremony has been postponed indefinitely. We can offer you a private room for debriefing, or—" I shook my head, cutting him off gently. "Thank you," I said, my tone measured. "No need." I gestured toward Clarissa, whose sobs had resumed in quiet, broken huffs. "I need no refuge. This is where she must live with her choices." The manager bowed slightly and retreated, leaving me alone with the echo of my own words. I crossed the marble floor to stand behind Evelyn, who clutched her perfume bottle like an anchor, still reeling from my revelation. She looked up at me, gratitude mingling with sorrow in her eyes. I placed a hand on her shoulder, lightly, so as not to startle her, and whispered, "Take your time." She nodded, stiffly, and turned her head away, wiping her cheeks with a lace handkerchief. The soft rustle of her silk gown was the only sound before the whispers resumed, punctuated by the click of camera shutters as guests recorded every moment. I moved toward the exit, each step deliberate, my suit brushing against the polished railings that lined the hallway. I thought of the photographer's angle I'd rehearsed, the moment I would be captured standing calm amid the storm. I had expected to feel triumph, a heady rush of vindication. Instead, I felt a tangle of release and melancholy, as though I'd let go of something heavy but precious, something that had once bound me to Clarissa's warmth and now lay broken at her feet. Outside, the courtyard was empty. Rose petals lay strewn across the stone tiles, remnants of an Isle ceremony that never reached its climax. The early afternoon sun had melted the dew, and a gentle breeze stirred the air scented with jasmine from the trellises overhead. I closed my eyes and inhaled, letting the perfumed breeze wash over me. The perfume I'd given Evelyn wafted in the distance, mingling with nature's fragrance and reminding me that sweetness and betrayal often wore the same mask. I walked to the fountain at the center of the courtyard, its water gurgling softly in contrast to the turmoil I'd left inside. I perched on the edge, my reflection fragmented in the rippling surface. It showed a man who had once been uncertain, plagued by doubt and fear. Now that man was gone, replaced by someone with a clarity forged in heartbreak. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, its screen lit with unanswered messages. There were texts from friends asking if I was okay, from colleagues offering support, and even one from Luna checking whether I needed backup. I considered replying, but let the phone slip back into my pocket. Words felt inadequate. A sudden click sounded behind me, and I turned to see Kai, the photographer, lowering his camera with a solemn nod. He had captured every moment. My entrance, the moment I objected, and now, my quiet solitude before the fountain. He crossed the courtyard and sat beside me without a word. We gazed at the ripples in silence. After a moment, he extended a hand, offering a folded copy of the evening's top social media posts. Hundreds of shares, comments ranging from praise for my courage to shock at the scandal. We leafed through them together as the sun shifted overhead. Each tweet and post cemented the truth I'd unleashed, broadcasting it far beyond the walls of the venue. "Ready?" Kai asked softly, nodding toward the exit gate. He had a second camera, smaller, tucked at his side, his backup, his witness. It felt oddly comforting to have him there, a steadfast friend in the aftermath. I looked at the posts one more time, then nodded. "Ready?" We rose and walked toward the grand wrought iron gate that led out to the street. As we passed under its arch, I felt the weight of expectation lift from my shoulders. Behind me, the guests would sort through the wreckage. Clarissa would face the social and legal consequences of her actions. Her family would pick up the pieces, and Miles Corbin would decide whether to press charges or cut his losses. But ahead of me lay an uncharted path, one that I would define for myself rather than inherit through vows tainted by deceit. We emerged onto the cobblestone drive, where a Blacktown car waited. I opened the rear door, paused to look back at the courtyard one last time, and offered a final nod to the scene of my own liberation. Then I slipped inside the car, closing the door softly. The driver started the engine, and we pulled away, leaving behind the scattered petals and the echo of shattered promises. As the town car rolled toward the highway, I exhaled, feeling both the sting of loss and the sweetness of release. The future was vast and uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in years, I felt the steady pulse of hope beneath the ache of betrayal, guiding me toward a life rebuilt on truth and resilience. The days after the wedding fiasco unfolded like a slow-burning fuse, each revelation igniting a fresh spark of outrage and disbelief within Clarissa's social circle. I watched from a distance as her family scrambled to contain the damage. Evelyn's once immaculate reputation now tarnished by whispers of impropriety, Gerald fielding prickly questions at every turn, and Ava, her younger sister, caught in the crossfire of loyalty and embarrassment. Miles Corbin, once the golden groom, had retained a lawyer and filed for fraud and emotional distress, citing the evidence I'd laid bare at the altar. His suit threatened not just Clarissa's fledgling career, but the very foundation of her standing in the city's elite. And through it all, I felt a quiet vindication, tempered by the knowledge that true justice wasn't in revenge but in the freedom that followed. It began with Evelyn's audit, one of those perfect cosmic ironies that life occasionally serves up. A routine tax review turned into a full-blown investigation when auditors flagged Clarissa's foundation donations as suspicious, noting unverifiable receipts and overlapping dates that coincided with her wedding preparations. Gerald called me late one evening, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and anger. "Micah, you didn't have to involve this," he said, the crack in his tone revealing his grief. "But thank you." I placed my hand on the phone, imagining his study lined with law books and family photos, now clouded by scandal. I did what needed to be done, I replied softly. She needed accountability. As news of the audit spread, socialites who once lauded Evelyn's charitable prowess now whispered behind manicured hands. Invitations evaporated, board positions dissolved, and the luncheon she'd planned for next weekend was canceled with polite regrets citing unforeseen circumstances. Evelyn's confident stride wilted into hesitant steps, her signature perfume now a bittersweet reminder of my afternoon visit. I saw the posts on social media, the hashtags #BurnNotice, #FalseBride, flooding popular forums, each share a public vote of contempt for Clarissa's deceit. I felt no pride in the spectacle. It was simply the inevitable consequence of actions left unchecked. Miles's lawsuit advanced with surprising speed. His attorney cited emotional distress and breach of contract, seeking significant damages for his client's irreparable harm. Clarissa panicked when she learned of the legal filings, her calls and voicemails piling up in my inbox, pleas for mercy, apologies for her mistakes, promises of restitution. I listened coldly, each message a reminder of her choice to hide the truth rather than confront it. I didn't return her calls. Instead, I forwarded her voicemails to my lawyer, compiling a dossier that mirrored her own web of deception. She reached out to Evelyn, begging for forgiveness that was slow in coming. But Evelyn, once her fiercest champion, now regarded her with rigid formality, a tight hug at the door followed by measured distance and polite conversation at family gatherings. When Miles settled with a quiet agreement that included both financial compensation and a public apology from Clarissa, the fallout reached its peak. Clarissa's reputation lay in ruins. Her PR firm lost clients who feared association with scandal, and her stake in her employer's company was revoked under a clause that barred employees involved in litigation. She tried to leverage her connections, but the elite circles she'd once navigated effortlessly now closed ranks. Board members she'd wooed turned cold, referring inquiries to her lawyer. The wedding downloads I'd compiled became footnotes in news articles, my name cited as the catalyst for her downfall. Yet for every salacious headline, I felt the weight of her absence from my life lifting, a liberation far greater than any sense of triumph. I filed for divorce the week after Miles's settlement, submitting paperwork that was both practical and symbolic. It was final, an acknowledgement that our 7-year commitment, once full of promise, had been irreparably broken. The courthouse was crowded that morning, friends and family filling the pews for support as we signed on the dotted line. Clarissa didn't attend. She sent a handwritten note expressing regret and requesting privacy that no longer belonged to her. I stood before the judge, voice steady, reading the decree with an odd sense of closure. The gavel fell, and with it, the last tether that bound me to her. Outside the courtroom, the sun felt different, brighter, sharper, a world now waiting for me to fill with new stories rather than echoes of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, I focused on work, immersing myself in logistical planning for the nonprofit I joined after our split. Volunteers rallied around me, inspired by the transparency and authenticity I brought to the organization. I traveled to cities I'd only read about, coordinating relief efforts and forging partnerships that made a tangible difference in people's lives. At night, I lay in hotel rooms far from home, waking to sunrise over unfamiliar skylines, the burdens of my past replaced by the promise of purpose. One afternoon in Montreal, I paused at a cafe window, sipping a latte as autumn leaves drifted past. The door chimed behind me, and a woman slipped into the seat across from me, dark-haired with an earnest smile that reminded me of someone I hadn't been. Hopeful, unguarded. "Micah Reyes?" she asked, voice trembling with a mix of awe and relief. I nodded, curiosity flickering. She unfolded her own story of betrayal, of lies whispered behind closed doors, and the slow erosion of trust. She told me how she'd watched my wedding confrontation on social media, how it had given her the courage to leave her cheating husband and reclaim her life. As she spoke, I saw in her eyes the same spark I'd once had, the realization that ending one story can birth another. We clinked our coffee cups in a quiet toast to new beginnings. I listened as she described her journey of self-discovery, her plans to start anew in a city where no one knew her past. I offered a genuine smile, the kind that comes when someone else's triumph resonates with your own. In that moment, I understood that my revenge had been a catalyst, but the real victory lay in every story reborn from the ashes of betrayal. Later, I walked the cobblestone streets of old Montreal, the fading light casting long shadows over the stone facades. My phone buzzed with a message from Luna. "Congrats, brother." Couldn't have been prouder. I paused beneath a street lamp, its glow illuminating my reflection in the window of a closed bistro. The man staring back at me was different, steadfast where I'd been uncertain, open where I'd once been guarded, free where I'd once been chained by deception. As I continued down the street, I realized that Burn Notice wasn't the end of my story, it was the spark that ignited the real one. Betrayal may steal your innocence, but it cannot steal your resolve. And with that resolve guiding me, I stepped into the night, ready to write chapters filled with honesty, purpose, and the unwavering knowledge that sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. A year later, I found myself in Montreal, far from the ruins of a life that had once seemed so permanent. My mornings began with the aroma of fresh baguettes and the murmur of French conversations drifting through cafe windows, and I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I'd traded boardrooms for community centers, deadlines for relief shipments, and in every act of service, I rediscovered purpose. One crisp afternoon, as I reviewed logistics for an international nonprofit at a sidewalk table, a woman approached and gently tapped my shoulder. She introduced herself as Isabel and confessed she recognized me from the viral video of the wedding that broke the internet. Her voice quivered as she described her own ordeal, an affair unraveled, self-worth shattered, and the courage she drew from watching my stand for truth. As she spoke, I saw in her eyes the same flicker I'd once felt, that moment when betrayal becomes the catalyst for transformation. We shared stories over steaming cups of coffee, our laughter mingling with the hum of city life. And in that connection, I understood that my journey had never been about revenge alone, but about inspiring others to reclaim their lives. When she toasted to new beginnings, I raised my cup, feeling the warmth spread through me, a reminder that healing often arrives in the company of kindred spirits. Later, I walked along the cobblestone streets beneath glowing lampposts, the wind carrying the scent of rain-soaked stone and hope. Clarissa had tried to erase me from her new life, but I'd written my name in permanent ink on my own terms. Each kindness, each honest action, each rescued opportunity a testament to the resilience that betrayal could not extinguish. And as I turned a corner into the vibrant pulse of the city, I realized that sometimes the fiercest loyalty we owe is to ourselves.